How many of you is this your first day here? Slackers. How many is it your second? Third? Yeah, mine too. We're gonna get started in a second. I like to banter a little bit beforehand and tell people I really like their hats that are coming in and sitting down. And I speak quietly even with a microphone, so can you guys hear me in the very back? Good. Awesome. I think that's probably the last of the trickles. So let's get started by introducing ourselves. You're welcome to the nanotechnology panel, which makes you some of the nerdiest people here at Comic-Con. Congratulations. Let's start with you.
With me. I'm William Niedermeyer. I'm an applied physicist. I work in nanotechnology on a daily basis. Background in most of the sciences, but applied physics, I actually make things that have to work. Love these conferences, be able to come out and share some of the things. And the name of this conference was What Nanotechnology Looks Like, and so I thought I'd actually bring some nanotechnology with me. So we'll get into that a little bit later.
That looks cool, even from here. So, I'm Charlie Pulsifer. I'm a science fiction fantasy author and a cardboard artist and a velociraptor impersonator. And I write books that include a lot of near-term science. So I delve into nanotechnology, biotechnology, a lot of genetics, and some really cool things that we're working on all the time. Like this guy, he's kind of my hero. I usually like to get my velociraptor impression out of the way first to warm you guys up. So I need one volunteer from the audience. Ooh, there you go. I need you to stand in the middle of the aisle over there. How many people have seen the first Jurassic Park? Good. Velociraptors don't wear hats.
I was scared. It did, it's okay. I'll get back up.
It's like, wait, hey, it went dead.
Thank you, Doctor. At the end, come up and then I'll give you a book for volunteering. Okay, so what is nanotech?
Oh boy. Most of you have worked in any of the sciences. We deal in different scales of size. And nano is kind of where we get to where we start losing the ability to really play with things that are smaller without having very, very, very large pieces of equipment. So if you think of like a water molecule, everybody knows that, H2O, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at a water molecule, the distance between those hydrogen atoms that are on there is about 1 nanometer. So if you work in like biological type things like molecules and things like that you work in biotechnology, that is nanotechnology. Enzymes and how they function are all at the nanometer level. So you are full of nanotechnology just on your own. We deal with more engineered type things where we're engineering particles that can do specific things, or group properties of particles that can do specific things, but they're all measured down in the billionth of a meter size. So we're dealing literally with atom constructions.
Yeah. And nanotechnology is far more diverse than you would expect. Like movies in the 80s made it seem like we're gonna have these tiny little robots that we just shrink down and send inside people. But it's starting to be a lot more complicated than that. So you're looking at new metamaterials that react differently at that level than they do larger scale. And then you're also looking at biological components. We recently have begun to be able to scan the interior of cells and map them a lot better than we used to. And there are crazy things going on inside cells. Bacteria actually have little motors, like have gears that drive their momentum. And they're calling them motors because they really do look like motors in many ways. And so there is nanotechnology all around us all the time.
Yeah, every form of science that you have out there now is now dealing in nanotechnology. Back in the mid-2000s, we found that this was the one technology that started unifying a lot of sciences that were never working together. Normally you wouldn't have a chemist work with a physicist, you wouldn't have a mathematician working with a biologist. But now that they're all coming together around this nanotechnology bibliography of language and how to use it, we're seeing a lot of the overlap of technology where normally you wouldn't. And a lot of surprising things are coming out of it, such as you were mentioning, and being able to understand cells. A lot of that's come from the instrumentation that we have today. The University of Utah has the USTAR program up there in the Sorensen facility that has they have brand new STEMs up there, which is a transmission electron microscope. And we're literally looking at the atomic structures of these nanoparticles up there in 3 dimensions.
Yeah. So it's really cool stuff. So let's explore a little bit more of some of the cool things that are happening with nanotechnology. I delve more into the pop culture uses. So you've got to pay attention a little bit to what is popping up in TV shows and television, movies, literature that actually resonates really well with what you're doing in the labs.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is diagnosis that they're doing with nanotechnology. We're seeing a lot more things like being able to track certain things that are happening in biological movements. Something that's actually brand new, matter of fact, I might have an image of it here, is we're learning how not just take one element and make nanomaterial out of it, but we're taking multiple elements together and we're getting something that acts completely different. For instance, corrosion, working with metals. If you can take corrosion out of the equation, there's a lot of things you can do that you couldn't do before. And we're doing that with nanomaterials on the surface of different metals, or even energy. I mean, you guys all have probably pocket phones with you, iPhones and so forth, and just the energy that you have in batteries for that. Looking at 35 to 40% increase of those alone, which means it's a lot more efficient. You're using less energy, and that's just due to quantum dots that they're talking about for the screens on your phone. So even little bits that change that you see in the consumer environment has a lot to do with the nanotechnology that's coming up.
Okay, and let's discuss single atom layers.
Sure.
I want to talk about silicene and graphene and
Sure.
chlorophene and a few other enes.
There's just some interesting kinetics that you find with these different materials and shear thickening fluids and things like that. So a lot of the sci-fi where you have armament, right? How many of you here have some form of armament that they've seen today? Probably everybody. We're getting down to shear thickening fluids with nanomaterials that will absorb energies that before were never thought of to be able to do so. So we're talking like being hit point blank with a rifle that it will do pretty much nothing to you. The kinetic energy gets turned over into heat through these nanostructures that they make. Graphene specifically has been really interesting because of the electrical properties that it has, but even better than graphene is they're coming out now with nano diamond. And so nano diamond has a lot of capabilities, both thermodynamically and structurally, that even the stuff we've been seeing with graphene, which is like flexible screens you've seen in some of these movies recently, and being able to fold open, and close a screen that you interface with, is based upon the graphene technologies as well as the quantum dots that they have out there. Does anybody know what a quantum dot is, just out of curiosity? One person does, in the back. Oh, a couple. So quantum dots have an interesting effect that you can put a voltage across them and do either a well, that's a hole, that's a quantum hole, or a dot, usually made out of gold, which is actually what I have right here. If you put a current across it, you convert that electricity to photon light, and you can get to a very specific wavelength. So you can either do that, or you can have it take light and shift it, which is actually what this is doing right here. These particles are actually smaller than the wavelength of light that you're seeing. It's actually not purple light that they're absorbing. It's just the group property on here is refracting the light to make it look purple. Same thing with these right here. These are only 4 nanometers of silver spheres that are inside of here. Matter of fact, I'll just show it real quick. Oh, my son's got me a little flashlight here. But you can actually see that is actually the backscatter that you're seeing of the nanoparticles as it goes through. But it doesn't change the actual light. So I'm not having it diffuse within the liquid here. The light is actually going around the particles and then out the other side. And you can have quantum effects with graphene as well. You can end up with electron transport, where you can have electrons over here doing something, and there's nothing happening along in the chain, and all of a sudden you'll have something on the other side that'll be doing the exact same thing. And we're seeing that with nanoparticles as well.
Yeah, and quantum dots are interesting because they're also finding, like graphene, you can spread out graphene and then put it under stress in small pockets, and it'll form quantum dots that act like quantum dots and also act like graphene. So we're really unsure what a lot of things will do until we start messing around with them, and it's exciting to see what we can do with these nano layers of particles.
That's been probably the biggest problem, is that you'll go through and do all these theories, and you'll make all these different nanomaterials in your mind, and you'll do all the math on them. And then when you actually go to try to produce it, it didn't turn out the way you thought it would. Matter of fact, you'll have things that'll be I gotcha moments where all of a sudden something's fluorescing and shouldn't be, which can really change your respect for what you're dealing with.
Yeah. The fun thing about nanotechnology is we have two sciences really all the time. We have the science of the large and we have the quantum mechanics, and they don't really mesh together all that well. And nanotechnology is edging on that of the quantum physics, where crazy stuff is happening all the time. Particles are moving in and out of existence, popping back and forth. They can be in multiple places at once until you observe them, and then they shift into one position. And so there's a lot we can do with these tiny particles.
Yeah, communications and things like that we're looking at with these quantum computers. Have you ever heard of quantum computers? They're actually working with nanomaterials for quantum computers, and you can actually, instead of using electrons to flow, you can use light flow. And you can have Bose-Einstein condensates are one of those things that act very, very strangely relativistically. But to be able to work in that world, you have to have tools that are small enough to work in that world. So when we looked at nanomaterial, we looked at being able to produce it in a way that had building blocks. So it's not just that you have one nanomaterial that does this one really wonderful thing. It's where you start getting a toolbox of all these different nanomaterials that you can start putting together, and then you can start manipulating things at that level.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the biological nanotechnology that we're working on, like the origami, DNA, things like that.
Yeah, again, once you have things like markers and you're able to track different things, in the DNA sequencing, you can get nanomaterial in there to help with genetically finding markers. And they're doing that today, where something used to take us, oh my gosh, was it years, when the first genome project, they were doing that. Like, it was incredible. Now they have systems that are literally, you take a blood sample from you, they run it in there, and they can run a majority of what the genome sequence needs to be in a matter of just a few hours, and that's due to some of the nanotechnology that they have to be able to separate all these things out. So diagnosis is huge inside of that. Another thing is imaging, which is one of the things we're just now working with. We had just a little bit of a breakthrough here recently, and I worked with a company called Adostat, where we came up with a way of manufacturing nanomaterial very inexpensively, and that's the other key, is that financially, you really can't do a lot of the science unless you can make nanomaterial for the same cost as something like chlorine, like you use on their toilet or whatever. It has to be really, really inexpensive. But we were able to make a breakthrough recently with radiochemistry, where we're able to put together multiple elements into a single particle, but have the particle still act like the majority element that's in there. For instance, we have gold particles that we now have cobalt-60 in, which is a radiometric isotope that you can see with MRIs and other types of equipment that they use for medical research. And the way that gold moves, because of its size, you can actually track it through the body, and you can start illuminating things like tumors internally, or areas where we can attach, because it's gold, we can attach monoclonal antibodies on the outside. And tumors like to absorb those, so we can actually see tumors way much better than you would ever be able to with some of these other methods.
Yeah. And the first nanotech clinical trial to cure a disease actually happened last year, and they are using origami DNA. So they use DNA that's folded with the cancer drug held at its center, with proteins on the outside that will attach to leukemia cells, and as soon as they attach, it sets off a chain reaction that opens the origami and injects that drug directly into the cancer cell.
And so if you imagine normally if you go through chemotherapy, they're wiping out everything within your system. This is a targeting type technology where it's only coming down to that point. As a matter of fact, the nanoparticles that using the gold nanoparticles you're using now within there are so carefully made that they can hit it with a radio wave and actually destroy it. They can actually make them vibrate, so you actually destroy the tumor from internal. And then have the unfold, and then have a statin or something similar to keep it from vasculating.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different types of things they're doing with the gold particles. They have gold stars that unfold, and gold rods that can be sent via ultrasound and electromagnetic, so they can be guided. So we're getting to the point where you can actually, well, not quite yet, but eventually be able to do microsurgery. So you can actually do surgery within a cell with these tiny robots.
Absolutely. And because we have biocompatibility for our nanoparticles that we're working with, we're able to have license to do things in acute care sometimes. And one of the things that we've been working with over the past few years, has anybody here had a cavity? Oh wow, yeah, a few of you. How'd you like to never have cavities? Where's my sons at? Here's Spencer and Seth right here. Guys, how many cavities have you had over the past few years here? Yeah. They're one of the test subjects that we have within the nanomaterials we're working for teeth. So if you imagine just in a normal life, never have dental caries ever again, is one of the things that we've been working with.
You're really missing out on a lot of fun, though.
But don't worry, they get all the
It's
candy.
the best. Let's also talk about, let's see, mentioned quantum computing. What about microcircuitry? What are we doing with nanotechnology to replace all the circuitry that's going on in our cell phones? And
You know, a lot of it has to do with the resistance that we're dealing with. With any time you move electrons through a medium, you end up with heat, you end up with losses. Looking at something even on a grander scale, our grid that we work with here in the United States, can you imagine how much we're actually losing on that just to heat? 40% in most cases or more. If you just solve the problem of transferring that without heat on the surfaces of just the wires, which is something simple like that, we would never have to import a barrel of oil again. Just to make it more efficient. We're talking orders of magnitude in efficiency that we're starting to see with nanotechnology, and again, making it affordable to where you can actually crop dust the lines, maybe, and that would increase your ability to move energy around. And even in the small things, so when you take something like this, and you get even smaller, there's some limitations that they're getting to, but the limitations aren't really down in the transistors here. They're getting down to nanometer-sized transistors, even out here at Micron, and storage devices are getting down to the single-digit nanometer sizes. What's happening is basically your battery that you have to deal with in here, how to store energy, how to move energy, and the losses that you have within there. You make something more efficient, quantumly efficient. You're talking something kind of on the order of where we started with this right here today. If you look back at the time of about 1970s, where we had rooms larger than this full of vacuum tubes that nowhere near had the power of this. You're talking about taking that step again, making that even smaller, and that comes down to where you can start putting it inside the body and actually monitoring inside the body with biotech.
Mm-hmm. Inside the body, into clothing, integrated into clothing. We're already to the point where we can put it on the outside of the body in very easy, light, stretchable means, like temporary tattoos that monitor your sweat for diabetes. And they recently did one that actually monitors it and then releases insulin via microneedles. So these little needles that you wouldn't even feel because they're so tiny, and they inject the insulin so you don't have to worry about a pump or needles, things like that ever again. What was that?
Where do I sign up? I'm diabetic.
You're talking about one of the things that we are really slowed down on. The technology is moving so fast that regulatory is not keeping up. And it's coming down to where there are a lot of things that are out there today that if you really have an acute health issue, you can get into some of these studies and some of these programs. But the reality is that the government is so far behind on really understanding, especially our government. Other governments are actually way farther ahead in being able to even come out how to regulate, how to do clinical studies and things like that. There's stuff that we're doing in the laboratory that would blow your minds. But the reality is we can't do anything with it with you. We just have to leave it in the laboratory.
Yeah. And there are, if you can prove that you have a life-threatening condition, there are right to try laws in many states, including Utah.
Utah has one.
And so you can actually get a lawyer and prove that you should be part of these trials.
Yeah, anything medical, you have an internal risk board at the hospitals, and that has to pass them before they can put it on your patient. And matter of fact, all the acute care ones that we've had have been family members that have come. We give them the material for their doctors. They understand what there is. They go and use it. But we've saved several legs and limbs to MRSA infections, which we do a lot with. Remember the image that we had up there just earlier, that was actually a bacterial image. You were seeing a fluorescent bacteria. And we were showing complete kill on that bacteria where other drugs just can't do it.
That's awesome. Using the gold? Or
Actually using these silver nanoparticles. And these are stable. These are not, this isn't like silver colloid or a silver ion or something like that. Those are, the difference would, that would be like a basketball here in my hand would be a nanoparticle of what, what this is, and the silver colloid is like that mountain over there. It's just completely different in what they are. Yeah, what you're seeing on the screen there is different wells there that are fluorescing. That is bacteria that's alive, and the other wells, well, there's nothing fluorescing in them. We're able to kill the bacteria completely on there. These are bacteria that we've done Salmonella, E. coli, Klebsiella, a lot of the pathogen type prokaryotic cells.
That's cool. Let's talk about a little more about electronics. What about solar harvesting using nanotechnology, nano antennae?
We've been having fun. So the sun has a lot of different wavelengths in it when it comes down to the Earth. We only use a very small fraction of that in solar panels, but if you could shift that wavelength of that light over to where the absorption is of the panel, you could actually get more energy out of it. And one of the things that's really simple is that we're looking at a spray that goes on the surface of solar panels that will shift that energy towards the UV band that junction receives inside of the solar panel, so you get more efficiency. We're not having to come up with any really strange thin films or anything. It's just a matter of using what's already there. We're just shifting that light that's more usable.
And what about other wavelengths? So capturing radio waves and...
Yeah, again, once you have the tools to work with the building blocks, when you're working with radio waves, even, I'll even say up at the other end of the spectrum with X-rays, working with radiation, we can make things that align up, they self-align, and we can make different building blocks with them to where we can have things like waveguides that are at the nano level. We can have not just waveguides for radio, but neutron guides for nuclear. So when you start talking about very high energetic particles, we can actually make them. And if you think of that, you can make a very, very tiny reactor if you had a small amount of radioactive isotope that you could actually focus all those neutrons into one location. It'd be kind of interesting how small something like that could happen But again, I don't think the Nuclear Regulatory Committee will let me start passing out nuclear reactors tomorrow.
Probably not quite.
No, bummer.
But it is exciting, the things that we're able to start collecting power-wise, that we can tap into solar, make it more efficient, tap into X-rays, radio waves that are just floating around all the time and wasted energy. And
Yeah, I was going to say, the thing with we look to something like a hydrogen economy. Everybody's been hearing about that. It'd be great if we could burn hydrogen because what you get at the end is water. So it's not that bad. The problem is on demand, being able to do that. Normally be able to do that, you have to have a lot of pressure. You have a lot of electricity, electrolysis, one way of doing it. But if you could actually manufacture it, accelerate that process in a smaller device, that's what some of the catalytic effects we're seeing from these nanomaterials are. So you could think of, well, if I can do that, you just made gasoline the most friendly to the environment fuel that could ever exist because it contains a huge amount of hydrogen. You just sequester the carbon, pull the hydrogen out, run it through a fuel cell when you need it. No more big batteries in your cars anymore for the electric cars. It literally is, you're running off gasoline, but you're getting the full efficiency of the gasoline. Kind of crazy, huh? Yeah.
And we are getting really close with a lot of these metamaterials that can do things like that and pull different molecules out. So desalinization, actually pulling water from the air without having to put in a ton of electricity into them. Being able to sequester hydrogen, it's really exciting.
Yeah, we've been looking at trying to get a drone that would actually pull water from the atmosphere and then break it down into hydrogen and use that through a fuel cell to keep it in as a low Earth orbit constant. And I don't think we're far off. I think we're maybe about 6 months away to finally see that as low Earth orbit satellite. To be able to deploy something like that and basically just hang around in the atmosphere and making its own fuel. A lot better than plutonium in a satellite, huh?
Yeah. And even more efficient than having to beam a laser to it constantly. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about integration into clothing a little bit more. Because everybody wears clothes. We like clothes. Some of us like fancier clothes than others.
You know, it's kind of interesting. I listened to a PBS program, a public radio program, a while ago. This would be about a good 10 years ago. And they were talking about how nanotechnology is looking towards the animal kingdom as to what the new textiles would be like. And realize that bird feathers do not have any pigment in them. Pigment, like we use in our clothing, is all usually metal-based. It's usually some sort of metal pigment that's in there, and that makes it heavy, so birds can't fly if they had pigment in their wings. All the colors that you're seeing in there are actually nano-level scale of refractance of the light that's hitting them. So if you can imagine more vibrant clothing like the plumage of a bird, that's where we're going towards textiles when nanotechnology actually becomes part of what you'd be wearing and being able to change color at an instant.
Yeah. Yeah, I read an article about that where they were looking at e-ink type displays where they could coat it with those metamaterials and then change the colors depending on what they needed, just by a small change in electrical input that alters the structure of these nanomaterials. Instead of actually having to emit light, they actually just change the structure, different color.
Yeah, we've all looked at different exoskeletons for science fiction, and some of that's starting to become science fact, where they have materials that will stiffen up, but then will become very pliable depending on the voltage that would be going through them. And my son Seth over here actually has cerebral palsy. He has hemispheric epitaxial cerebral palsy, and his right leg does not function quite like his left leg really does. And to be able to mitigate that, we're actually looking at working with 3D printers technology, where we're putting nanotechnology in these 3D printers to make stronger materials that we can put for his leg so that he can take off like a rocket instead of like a tank.
Yes. How about prosthetics and a lot of the things that we're doing to integrate those into nerve cells and the brain?
Yeah, and that's something that's been really interesting at the University of Utah for many, many years. Some of the first interfaces to neural tissue was done up there, where they would actually have little needles, and then they've even gotten to the point where they've gotten into the optic nerve. So we're talking about a lot of situations where people who are blind can now see within a resolution, not really, really high resolution, but enough that they can actually see. We're getting to the point where the nanotechnology is going to be better than the biological that you were already born with. And people may elect to actually have prosthetics put on instead of having the limbs that they have now. They may go for prosthetic vision as opposed to their current vision, depending on what their work life is, what they need to be doing. You know, it'd be better to have much better vision if you're a fighter pilot, I guess, than if you were a botanist.
Yes. Well, even as a botanist, you could be able to zoom in on the cellular level and check things out on your plants.
Yeah, I think you'll see it in clothing first and things that you wear, and then we'll move into things that will be cleared for inputting in the body, because putting things inside the body, we do have regulations for.
Yes.
And we can do that.
Yeah. And speaking of graphene again, they have made synthetic neurons out of graphene that they've shown to actually interact with regular neurons. So we're getting much closer to being able to replace nerve cells that are damaged, severed, broken. And so as a science fiction writer, I love that stuff. So I'm working on like wireless backup drives for your brain, so you can transmit memories and hold it in a box and things like that. So there's a lot of really cool things out there, but in the short term, it means that people with prosthetics will be able to feel with their prosthetics. There was a study done very recently where the man was able to distinguish smooth from ridged using a new prosthetic sensor in the fingertip. And it's really clunky and slow right now. It's not like human, but at some point, he's right, it will cross the line and be better. So you'll actually get more sensations than you would with your normal hand. You'll be able to taste pheromones and feel textures and calculate changes in temperature and a lot of different things with your prosthetics.
Yeah, being able to shrink down the instrumentation that normally you have just in a laboratory into something that you personally can just go out and buy. I was still amazed about how many things just plug into like an iPhone right now that you can measure. I mean, a pulse oximeter back in the days was, you know, a big clunky machine. And you can buy them, just plug them in and monitor them with a Bluetooth, you know, and just keep it on your body at all times. There's just so many of these larger type instrumentations that are shrinking very, very quickly and economically.
And in South Korea, they recently were able to 3D print carbon nanotubes onto soft materials using low temperature plasma. So they're able to shoot the carbon nanotubes onto paper, fabric, things like that. So we'll be able to integrate electronics into your clothing a lot more, micro LEDs, possibly be able to charge your phone from the movements in your body throughout the day, things like that. So it's.
Who would like a Harry Potter cloak? We're actually working on those. There's for the military, there's a millimeter wave radar absorbing nanomaterial that we put inside of clothing, but it'll absorb all millimeter wave radar. It's kind of stealth technology for somebody who's wearing it. But theoretically, you know, you could get to a point if you can align those properly, you can absorb all electromagnetic, which would be all light. So it'd be kind of like a walking black hole, though not quite a transmit what's behind you type thing.
Yeah, I saw one where they did that with a tank. So they coated the tank with metamaterial that can control the electromagnetic spectrum that's coming off of it. And so anybody looking at it via radar infrared, they can broadcast what looks like a car. So it looks like a little sedan driving down the road, but it's a tank. But
Yeah, British Aerospace did that, and they thought it'd be fun to have a Pac-Man actually moving on it.
that it would be fun. Yeah, so it's not legal for us to actually use that, but there's some treaties out there that say you can't do it, but it's still possible.
Yeah, the tendency to do good right now in society is much, much higher than the tendency to do bad. I mean, the stuff you could do with nanotechnology on the other end of how bad things could be, you could wipe out entire civilizations if you had basically one genetic thing that you only attacked, and you can do that with nanobiology and nanotechnology. But everybody seems to be trying to look more towards how are we going to feed 20 billion people? Where's their waste in that area? And we were approached a few years ago by Driscoll Dole just for the berry industry for fruit and how we could stop how much was lost from the fields to the actual doorstep. And I was kind of shocked. I didn't realize that industry loses 30% of their product before it even reaches you guys in market. And even after then, they can only hold it for so many days. So it can only go so far, just by transport of where this is available. And if you could just eliminate that, think about the hunger in the world that you could stop if you weren't losing half of your food all the time.
Yeah. And I actually saw something the other day that it's about 40% of all food made in the US goes to waste. And it has to do with not looking pretty enough, and spoilage, and us just throwing it away because we left it in the refrigerator for 7 days straight when it was going to expire 3 weeks ago. So
yeah, what would your purchasing habits would be if your food never went bad? A much smaller refrigerator, that's for sure.
Smaller fridge, smaller pantry.
Smaller portions, maybe? No.
Unfortunately, there'd be a smaller economy.
I don't know. We've got so many people that are coming up in the world. We're seeing a rise of civilizations that are embracing nanotechnology, and India is one of them. And you're seeing a lot more happening in the sciences in India than any other country. And there's a real risk of being overrun by the technology of other countries. So we really want to make sure that we can have kind of the best coming out of this area and in the U.S. as well.
You mentioned earlier about how some countries were adopting it better than like the U.S. but regulations can't keep up. Is one reason India's developing it more because they have less of those regulatory things?
Not necessarily. It's they do have regulatory, but they also have controls for this type of science. Where in the U.S. we have like the National Institute of Standards, NIST, we have the National Science Foundation, we have the National Institute of Health, and they tried to all come together with the Nano National Initiative program, which was a few years ago. And we thought that would be a really good way of breaking those open, and instead it just came with how many ways can we shut it down? It's easy for people to say no in regulatory. That's what they do, that's their job. India seems more to be saying, yes, but how do we do it safely?
Yeah. Yeah, in the US, we really do like to say, we're not sure of the side effects of this, so no. And so you need to do more testing before we'll say yes.
And one of the reasons why the company I work with has gone so far with nanotechnology is we flew under the radar for 13 years. We literally were working out of 40-foot container units that were converted into clean rooms inside. And I worked with another PhD, Dr. Gary Samuelson, in the very beginning, and we were just out in West Jordan, and nobody knew what we were doing inside those 40-foot containers. But for 3 years worth of research, we went to the first Nano Utah conference. We were producing particles that the rest of the industry is just now producing today, and that was back in 2005. So because we kind of did it upon ourselves and had our own budget, and we weren't hampered, we had a rapid prototype capable of, again, making something like this, where if you had to buy this at Nano Composites, it'd be about $50,000. We make this for about 50 cents. That's a huge difference in nanomaterial cost.
Do you have some more pictures and things you want to show us before we open it up to?
Let's go ahead and open it up. I just
Okay,
showed you a couple.
let's open it up to questions. Wow.
We've got a microphone going around, by the way.
You're gonna
so
stay busy.
Actually, if you want to line up right here,
Oh,
if you have
that's
questions,
probably better.
they'll just pass the microphone. Can you just like hang out here? Yeah, you can
Yeah,
say
you
that.
say it. That way.
So I was studying astrophysics, and one of my big inspirations for me to do that was the Mark Stiegler short story, The Gentle Persuasion, or the Gentle Seduction. And they talk about that, about being able to send nanomachines into space and carve out asteroids into whatever sort of environment you wanted. What is the, I suppose, like, what's the prognosis of being able to make nanomachines that can actually do that sort of construction and make their own structures?
You know, at the University of Utah, we have an electron microscope up there that's known as the FIB, and it has a gallium beam that can actually cut things out at the molecular level. They are making gears. They even have this beautiful oculus thing that's like an eye, like an iris that can shrink and open. That's all at the nano level. So being able to make machines like that is not beyond what we have. Making them fast enough and making them in quantity enough to actually move something more macro, that's another story. So we can do that now, and it's pretty amazing. Everything from gears to engines, you name it. They've been able to basically do that with that type of technology.
And with larger scale robotics, we're getting very good at creating hive mind robotics. So multiple robots with their own little task, but they all work together to accomplish really big things, much like ants and bees and things like that. So they don't need a ton of programming, but they can accomplish really cool things. And those are getting smaller and smaller and smaller too. So eventually it will cross into the nanotech realm as well.
You spoke about the prosthetics and being able to do nano-level nerve repairs and things like that. In your estimation, me, the average consumer, how far away in the timeline am I from being Adam Jensen?
It really is how noisy you are, if you want to really know. If you are noisy enough to your congressmen and other people, your local laboratories that are working in that area, you can get into those things and you can be a part of those things. I mean, we're looking at where they're now starting to do tissue transplants for nervous tissue. They're able to take your own cells, get stem cells from that, and be able to grow your own normal nerve tissue and then implant that and have it take. And with these structures they have now, to get nerve tissue to grow is actually not simple. It's actually pretty difficult. But scaffolds now that we have, nanomaterial, allow that to happen. But it really is, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah, so write lots of emails and letters.
Yeah.
Okay. I got two, but I want to keep, you can just go through them quick. One is prosthetics and our synthetic muscles, but can you imagine a way to make them run off of ATP so that the body provides the energy for it?
Yeah, we've actually looked at that. We found that it's very poor.
Okay. I was kind of curious about that concept. Do you see that advancing though?
With what we can do now with electromagnetic movement between micro machines and nano machines, has a lot more power than what an ATP function, like a biological function, would have.
Okay.
It's an economy of scales that you start working with, and you kind of see that between an elephant's trunk and in the muscles in your arm.
Mm-hmm.
You have something that's very pliable, can move around, is extremely strong, but it's also very large. So the biological things generally have to be larger to get that kind of scale.
Okay. Now the other one is, what's the smallest scale torus that you can create that can also handle a fusion event within it?
By standard technology, just standard technology, you're talking about something about the size of this room. But if you're talking about being able to control, like I was mentioning before, the neutron flux, things like that are going on within it, you could get something down to a tabletop type unit. I can see that actually happening.
Okay, I have two quick questions. One, the other day I was watching the SciShow YouTube channel, and they're talking about making space probes that are more or less probably have solar cells and propel them by lasers. But the craft itself is only maybe about a gram or something like that. And so, how would you produce enough energy to send the signal back and to do all the other tasks? Another question
The first one, there's a lot of energy in space. There's a lot of energy that comes from the sun that can be captured. you can get energy, within space itself. When you're talking about fuel, when you talk about laser for propulsion or something that's relativistic type speeds, you start increasing mass dramatically. So for instance, like an ion engine, that you would increase the speed of the argon gas so fast that you're reaching those relativistic, close to speed of light. The mass starts increasing. You have that changes, which is why today, if we do deep space probes, they are ion engines. We actually do that now.
Okay. And how close are we to maybe injecting little rotor-ritter into our bloodstreams?
The control systems right now that you're looking at are very, very large for very small areas. One of the problems that we're looking at in the very beginning, again, we don't have license to just start flooding you guys with nanoparticles and see what happens. One of the problems is being able to track where these particles go within the body in the first place, which is why one of the breakthroughs we're trying to complete here literally within the next few weeks is this cobalt-60 nanoparticle that we're working with that we can actually see with a gamma camera through a body. We're using rodent models right now. But actually see where these nanoparticles go will help us understand what shape, size, mass density, composition, all these things do in an actual human body. Once you understand that, then you can start manipulating it and doing those types of things. So we're still that next step.
And to explain how slow it really is, the nano trial that I mentioned for leukemia using origami DNA, it was a trial of one person. And so it takes a lot of time for them to get permission and cut through all the red tape to do more and more and more.
There are associations that help push certain technologies for like the Cystic Fibrosis Association. We are just now starting to talk with them about working with their different hospitals of different strains of bronchial epithelial cells and making sure we don't do any harm with the nanoparticles first. But we're looking at technologies that can help them in systemic infections that generally cause the death in people with cystic fibrosis. It's not just the condition they have, it's the sense that they have their immune systems usually just get down to a point where they can't fight normal infection.
I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more, if there's any more to be said about solving the problem you mentioned about losing energy to heat transference, heat loss, or what are some ways that can be done, or what are some ways that are being looked at right now?
Economy of scale is what held most of that back. Graphene is really great stuff, but even that's really expensive to manufacture. That's why we were focusing on technologies that would be, a competition of what copper costs, when you just normally put copper out there. So we have technologies today that will move electrons extremely efficiently. You've heard about a lot of these materials used for like maglev trains and things like that. These superconductors is really, what we're talking about. But to have the effect of like a superconductor. So the question is, can I take a superconductive material that is in a bulk, type material, and can I turn it to nanomaterial and have the same effect? And can I then spread that on something that already exists and get those electrons to flow like that on the outside of the wire? By the way, electricity flows on the outside of those big wires you see outside that are hanging all over the place. It's not on the inside.
And then we're also getting a lot better at heat scavenging. So a lot of that heat we can recapture and convert back into electricity. There's still a loss, but it's not as drastic.
I was curious about possibility of expanding the visual spectrum to the naked eye beyond, even like ultraviolet and infrared, and also the possibility of regulating mental illnesses, even like PTSD, bipolarity, ADHD. Is that possible to use nanotechnology for those things?
Again, once we learn where the nanotechnology will go inside the body, there are things that you can do everywhere from neurological medicines down to just a standard oncology, for cancer treatment. I mean, the thing is, we just don't know enough because we haven't been allowed to really just put this inside of bodies to clinically know. But yes, that possibility is there.
All right, I also have two questions. The first is, you had mentioned sequestering water from the air using nanotechnology. And in Salt Lake here, we have that awful inversion during the wintertime. And then if you can just expand beyond, looking at China, how terrible their air is. Is there any headway on that front?
Oh, absolutely. I was approached a while ago by the Yao Li family who built that gigantic multi-billion-dollar hotel there in China, and they wanted to have that have a zero factor for the environment. And one of the things they were looking at was nanotechnology for all the windows that were on there, so that the air, when it came in contact with it, would catalyze so you could get some of that pollution converted off of that. So there's a lot of, they talked about actually putting in the roads as well, titanium dioxide and some of these things in the roads to convert some of the emissions. But if you think of an economy that changed, like if tomorrow gasoline only put out water, instead of all these other toxic fumes, these ROx, SOx, and NOx that come out of engines, out of combustion engines, then yes, your environment is really much better. But a lot of the pollution that they're finding here, even by nanotechnology, we've been finding where that pollution actually came from. And I found out that most of it's actually coming from California, not locally. So, you know, the particulate matter we're finding in the air, they weren't really looking at that until they started looking at nanostructures that they were pulling out of the air at Utah State.
And I'm terribly sorry, but we are completely out of time. They're flashing the sign at me multiple
I'm more
times.
than happy to talk to you
But yeah,
afterwards.
come find us in the hallway. I'm at Burgundy 29 if you want to come talk to me about all the blogs that I read every day and my books.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome.
I'm the founder of Attostat. I have several patents that I've done in nanotechnology production, but it's all applied physics from the University of Utah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you? What is your career then?
Hi.
Like, what are you doing where you're using this?
Yeah, I'm the chief science officer for Attostat Incorporated right now.
Okay.
So I'm daily working with nanomaterial for the past 14 years.
Okay. Do you have a business card by any chance?
I don't, but there's the Attostat website, and I'm on there, and you can get a hold of me through that.
Because I never heard of this company before, and I'm not going to really remember the name, which is why I wanted the card. How do you spell this company name?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How do you spell this company name?
Attostat is ATTO STAT. Yep. STAT. Yep, .com.
I think it's interesting on some of these sci-fi shows to talk about making little wormholes and say, well, we probably don't have enough energy to make one for reciprocal. We make a tiny little nano deal which has our DNA and all that jazz. And
Well, a lot of the problem is waste. You know, as he was talking about here,
Right.
I mean, you have millions of electron volts that work within a little radioactive isotope, which is a lot better than tens of electron volts that you get from a normal chemical reaction, which we're normally used to in like
Right.
batteries and stuff. So, I mean, if you can change that and you can control that, and nanotechnology looks like the way to do it, then you're able to have a phone that never has to be recharged.